Good afternoon. This is JoAnn Almonte with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. Today is July 17th, 2023. We are currently at the Tuskegee University. I am currently conducting this oral history interview with
Tinoco
and Vanessa Obando.
Now, before we begin, can you start by telling us your name and how it's spelled, please?
My name is Edith Powell, Edithpowell.
Lovely. Can you tell us when, where you were born, your childhood, your education, like your early years?
Where I was born, or when? I was born in 1940 here in Tuskegee, not very far from this place. And I grew up here till the first grade. And then I moved to Auburn. My parents moved to Auburn, took us. And I started first grade, went through Auburn University there. But my grandparents and my aunts still live here, so we came home every weekend, basically, for years. In 1958, I graduated from high school, and I started at Auburn University the next week, and I went straight through 3 years. So it was 4 years of on quarter system then. Then I was majoring in pre-med, and I went to Montgomery to do a 12-month internship in clinical laboratory science at Old St. Margaret's Hospital. It was the only big hospital there. It was a Catholic hospital then. And after the 12-month internship, I was hired to work at the hospital in the laboratory, where the lab does the diagnostic part for blood work for the physicians in the hospitals. And I stayed there for 5 years, and then I went to Baptist Hospital, which was new, to set up their blood bank. I became very interested in blood banking. My specialty area in the hospital was hematology and immunology, and blood banking is a form of immunology. It's called immunohematology, basically, in the academic arena. And then I worked there for many years, but I took a year leave and went to Louisiana for an advanced internship in nothing but blood banking, and came back and stayed. And then I worked for the Red Cross for a while. In the meantime, I got my master's, and then I had the opportunity to come back to Tuskegee to teach in the medical technology. By that time, it was called Medical Technology Program here on campus, which was a 4-year baccalaureate program. It was the same as the pre-med program at Auburn, but it was just called something different. And so I did that until I retired in 2008. I taught immunology and hematology and immunohematology. I also did, after several years, I had a joint appointment with agriculture as cooperative extension as a health specialist. And I was put on a research team in molecular biology there, and we did human work, nutrition. We're looking at genetics for certain things in African American population. And from that, during the time that I was here, I went on a Fulbright it was a group Fulbright. We went to Africa, to Senegal and the Gambia. And my specialty area that I was looking at was how they treated and diagnosed people with anemia and Burkitt's lymphoma, which is a form of a malignant tumor. And then several more years later, we went several times to teach molecular biology to students, we actually taught it to faculty here in the summer in high school, so they could teach the molecular biology unit when it was new, to put it in the curriculum. And then we were asked to come to Africa to teach it, so went there 3 years and taught it at universities and private schools in Kenya and then South Africa. And then I retired in 2008. By that time, I'd gotten my doctorate. I also worked part-time at the VA because we were required to keep our license. We had to stay tuned with what was being used in the field, the testing apparatus. So I worked at the VA for all that same number of years I was here, because the VA is right down the street. And then after I retired, I decided that I wanted to learn more about George Washington Carver, because I remember that my grandmother had known him, and she had sent things out here to his laboratory. I don't know if you know that story, but he didn't have very much lab. He had no lab when he came here. So the community people put things that they didn't need together, like cups and bowls and saucers, and he converted them into whatever kind of equipment he needed that he could. And so they were also very interested in flowers, because there was no flower stores here at the time. And he would come from here downtown on the weekends, and he'd pass by my grandmother's house, and the women in the community grew flowers for church celebrations and funerals and weddings and that sort of things. They couldn't buy them in the grocery store, and there was no Walmart or Kmart or any of those that sell plants like they do now. So he would let them know when they had like chrysanthemums in the fall or flowers for spring gardens. He'd come by and tell them about it. And so he helped grandmother he showed her how to, what we call a splicing, but it's where they took one plant of one color, a breed, and put it with another one, and it became a duplicate, had both of them on the same plant. She had a huge camellia bush, and she reminded me when I was a teenager that that big bush that had 3 colors of flowers on it was actually 2 bushes, one with solid red, one with solid white, and then she had a red and white striped blossom, all 3 on the same bush, was what he had helped her do and show her, and it had grown from a little plant to a huge mongoose plant when I was grown. And I remembered that, but I put it away and I didn't think about it anymore until I came back here to teach. And so I decided that when I retired, I needed a hobby. So I came around to the archives and asked if I could read some of Carver's letters in his collection. And they said, oh yeah. Dana said, oh yeah. He was fairly new here then. He said, yeah. Well, I didn't like history and I didn't like English or anything when I was in college. I only liked science and blood and stuff. So it was very out of order for me to be interested all of a sudden. But since Carver was a scientist, that sort of fit what I liked. So I started coming here. And then sometimes people would call and ask, or send him an email, ask if we had a letter about Carver, that they'd heard Carver said so-and-so to something, and was there a letter in the files? And he would ask me if I'd seen one. And sometimes I had, and I'd go, be able to give it to him so he could send a copy to him. So then, in doing research for some other person in Australia that he asked me to help with, there were several hundred letters that I had to pull and make copies for that young man. I noticed that there was several copies of letters back and forth between a company in Columbus, Georgia. It made Tom Houston Peanut Company. They used to make little 5-cent bags of peanuts, and you'd see them right up at the cash register. And Carver. And he did some research for them on peanut diseases, which was new at that time. And it was 1928. He started his business in 1924 or 25. But anyway, I saw several hundred letters, and I thought, this story, I've read a lot of books about Carver. I've read everything I could find. And it was mentioned generally, but it was never discussed in detail, and what he did is not known, basically, because some people might disagree, but if you really knew about the culture, you would know that it saved the peanut industry in the South at that time. Because there were a lot of peanut diseases being discovered that could kill a crop overnight or two, and they didn't know what to do about it, and farmers didn't know the names, they didn't know what to do. And he helped Tom Houston identify those and get the word out to the farmers. And anyway, it became a big story, so I published that book. And then it was just released last fall. But in the process, I've learned a lot about Carver and in the letters. And so now I'm being paid to work here 3 days a week to go through all the Carver files and refile them, put them in new folders, and be sure all their letters are there chronologically, and be sure the pages of different letters are there, and see what is there, and we're going to try to make an updated find and aid, which we don't have an updated one right now. So, and it's being funded through the Smithsonian grant. So, there are various other aspects of that grant, but out of what we'll find, what I'm finding, and when they are going to have a big exhibit at the Smithsonian. I'm not sure, there are 5 HBCUs involved, and each one has specialty areas. So, as I understand, they'll be looking at what each one has and then picking things that might be the best to put into a set of exhibits. So, the work that I'm doing, and the lady that works with me, Ms. Middleton, who does the photographs, they'll pick and choose some of those things that we have identified and use those in the exhibit, I hope. And then I don't know what I'll do then. I hope by then I'll find some other good. There's always something good in these letters, very interesting. So if you can find enough, I can make a report or, make a talk to somebody. Anyway, spread the word about what's in the archives in the letters of Carver.
Could you talk about what content was on these letters, or maybe specifically what has been most significant to you that you found within these letters?
What's most significant to me that I found?
Or there's just the general content of the letters?
Well, the letter, Carver came here in 1896, and it took several years for him to become famous enough, known enough outside of this county, because at that time it was very, very southern, very segregated, and the black farmers were the focus of Carver's work in this county, Macon County. Auburn University was the land grant school for agriculture for the state of Alabama, and Alabama A&M was the HBCU, or the Black Land Grant School. It's in North Alabama. But Tuskegee had been here doing that work along at the same time, and so the rest of the HBCUs in the country, the agriculture schools, aren't like this one. The legislature tacked Tuskegee onto the agriculture extension work, and it's called Auburn University, what was API then, A&M, and Tuskegee. But still, they had county agents in all the counties at the time, but they kind of left Tuskegee, Macon County alone, and let when they appointed the black agents, became sort of for Tuskegee, and Auburn didn't have any black agents. Alabama A&M did. So over the years, the work here that was sort of confined to Macon County spread out to other counties. However, Carver, when his time, he died in 1943. So between when he came and when he was doing his work to help the black farmers, there were many people that wrote him letters. They would come to meetings here, so they would meet him. And then if they had questions, he would encourage them when they got home with their farms, if they had problems or questions, to either write him or come back to a meeting or come visit him. And he spent hours doing work, helping them. They were not many generations, maybe 2 generations or 3 from slavery. Most of them were poor. They had been working as sharecroppers, or had been slaves and were former slaves. an offspring of former slaves. So they didn't have a whole lot of, I have to get the right word. They were very smart in what they did, but they were used to being told what to do and only do that. So if they thought they wanted to plant something different, and the plantation owner did not want to, then they did not do that. You see. So Carver found when he came, he had been trained at Iowa State. He had been trained mostly by all white. He had grown up among white people, very few colored people. He was the first black student at Iowa State. He was the first black graduate of Iowa State. He was the first master's student at Iowa. And when he graduated, he was the best trained black agriculture person in the country. And Booker T had just had the Alabama State Legislature set up and put into place the Extension Service. So if Booker T was going to have a research facility here with his School of Agriculture, then he had to have somebody to run it, and he wanted a black person to run it. And Carver was who was recommended, and he came down here. He left a school that had pretty much money, pretty much faculty, trained faculty, didn't have to ask for funding for equipment, had a curriculum, and he had been, like I said, among white people. He came down here, he had no curriculum to speak of, no trained faculty to speak of, no budget, no main building, and no lab. And he was kind of shocked, and I don't think, in what I think, he was not really realizing what his job was going to entail. That he wanted to do research at that same level of research to help Booker T increase the capability of education level at Tuskegee. But he wasn't able to do that because he didn't have any. The curriculum at Tuskegee at that time, it was started on July the 4th, 1881, so he came in 1896. And there was very little money, and he was going to do research, but he couldn't do any because he didn't have a lab and he didn't really have a big building. And Booker T wanted him to set up the grounds, landscape the grounds, and they would build a building, and he would get in the building, but the building was not going to be, a state-of-the-art by any means. But they worked on it, and he agreed to stay and help Booker T. He wanted him to be able to succeed with what his goals were, what he wanted to do. Booker T was not here on the campus, I would imagine 75 to 85% of the year. He was out raising money, and he had other people, to the treasurer, and his brother John was sort of in charge of the industries, and Carver went to them for what he needed until Booker T came back. But anyway, I think you have to know the conditions that he came under, and I found those in those letters. People would write, had very little education, but yet they would write. Sometimes they get someone else to write the letter for them. So you can get, over the years, the letters increased in people who would write to him, university presidents, faculty, researchers in agriculture from Harvard, from all the Ivy League schools, all over the country out west, people who were heads of departments, not researchers at university, but researchers in commercial companies that were interested in farming peanuts, especially in sweet potatoes. That was his main area. Lay people that just heard of him would just write and say, "I'm proud of you for our race." There just all kinds of letters in here. But it lets you see the culture. It lets you see it lets you get an idea of people's educational background, the things that they're interested in. And he was a very spiritual person, and he worked in his later years with the YMCA. He went up and down the coast giving lectures. And he taught a Bible school class. It was in the evenings, on Sunday evenings. So he was an artist. He was a musician. He played the piano, the guitar, the accordion, and some other things that we don't probably know about. There's something called a quill, Quill. It was like, I think it was like a reed. You know, there's in some of the countries, they have something that look like pieces of sugar cane, fishing pole, cane, pieces of it, different heights, and they put them together and they make a reed, a beautiful harp thing. Or I guess a harp. It's sort of like a harp. Anyway, I think that's what they call a quill. I read about it. He didn't know. He knew about it when somebody wrote and asked him that he wanted to find one, and they said they had not been able to find one, but they had heard somebody talking about it and they were interested. They were in the music department at some university, and they wanted to add one to their music equipment. And nobody that they had asked knew about it, so they wrote Carver, and he said, yeah, he knew about it. Carver knew about everything that it's amazing what he knew about. And he told all about it, so I found that letter. I found that was very interesting. He also made paint from clay, dug out of clay banks around here. We've got a lot of clay in the soil here. And he would make different colors. And he also used colors of flowers in the petals. He used nuts, and he would extract and he would make different colors. That was a big part of what they wanted him to commercialize. Carver was not interested in commercialization at all. He was interested in taking things apart and finding out what percentage of whatever was there, and seeing if he could find something in this area that would be local, that the poor farmers who didn't have money could put together and come up with the same result in their farm, from like a fertilizer. Commercial fertilizer was expensive, and they couldn't afford it. So he found things a formula of things that he could find around here and put together, and that would give the same. Maybe they may have to buy a little bit of something else, but it mixed with it, but it wouldn't be what they would have been as far as if they had to buy only commercial fertilizer. And all the products that he is attributed to have made, he did not invent peanut butter, that's for sure. He didn't invent a lot of those. He would get samples of them from the companies that made them, and he would take them apart and find out for himself what was in there and see if he could recreate something, if he could grow some of the contents himself here on the plots, the experimental plots, and show the farmers how to grow those things, and then they could put them together and make the same, something similar. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So he 2 or 3 times they tried to get him to commercialize something that he had put together, and he would let him use his name, but he would not take the money for anything. He didn't want the money. He got a raise once. He came here, I think, at $1,000 a month, $1,000 a year. And he never got a raise. He never asked for a raise. He was given a raise by one of the presidents later on, but he didn't take it. That according to what is in the letters, he had room and board, and that was a help. And when he would go to make a talk anywhere, which he did the latter years, he was gone a lot. The people who asked him to come, he would tell them he would not charge them a fee. They would want to know how much he'd charge to come talk. He said the only thing he would charge would be his travel expenses and his food while he was there. And that's what he did.
And
That was a lot about your question. I don't know if I answered enough.
Yes,
yeah,
Oh, he also got letters from people all over the world. He got, one time he got a letter from the spokesperson in the United States from Mahatma Gandhi, who was worried about, they were worried about him because he did a lot of fasting, and he'd get very weak when he did his fasting for his issues that he was trying to bring to the public's attention about fasting. And he was asked to create a diet for him that would help him get his strength back after a particular long time fast when he was not doing very well. And he did that. He was asked to go to Russia and teach them how to do some things over there. He would not go, but he sent one of his former students who had graduated and gone on and was doing very well. He sent him, and he stayed several years and helped him.
and you mentioned a connection between your mother and Carver. Can you tell us a little?
grandmother.
Your grandmother. I'm sorry. Can you tell us a little bit more about your grandmother and that connection?
I don't have a whole lot of information more. When I was little, when you're little, you don't ask questions. You hear some things, but you don't ask a lot of questions. Anyway, so I didn't know what to ask. But I do know that, like I said, her house had a huge flower beds on either side of the front yard. She had a big yard. And she ran a boarding house. And in the back, we had a humongous garden, because that's what fed. It was during the Depression, after the Depression and the war, and things were rationed. What she fed the boarders came out of that garden, and basically she didn't buy anything but flour and sugar, like in big 25-pound bags or 50-pound bags. Coffee. Gas was rationed. You could only buy so much. You had a little ration book with little coupons, and you could only get that much per month or whatever the little books were issued. And she would make ends meet. Of course, she had boarders, and she had also fed people in the community lunch and breakfast and dinner sometime. We call it supper. And but she would swap some of her coupons, like for gas or tobacco, to somebody else for their flour or sugar coupons to increase what she was able to put. She canned things that in the summer we ate. The dining room table was full of things. I would tell my students we had butter beans and peas and green beans and whatever. You ate what was coming out of the garden that was ripe. You didn't have just one kind of bean and one or two other things, because we didn't have refrigerators. She had an ice box, and I don't know if y'all know. Y'all are so young, you probably do not know, but it wasn't very big. The thing was about this big, this tall, and at the top of it was a shape of it had a compartment, and the ice man came once or twice a week. I remember he used to have a big wagon, and he would come to the front of the house. The wagon had a mule, I guess, pulled it. I don't remember paying attention between a horse and a mule, but it was one of those animals. And in the back would be a great big hunk, would be stacks of blocks of ice, and he had a thing that was it looked like two hooks hooked together, and it was huge. It was a big thing, and he would go push it, pull it apart, and the things would come out, and then he'd put it on the ice block and squeeze the top of it, and it would clamp it, and then he'd bring it in the house. So Grandma put it in the top of that ice box, and it would keep the bottom cold, but there wasn't much space down there, so you only could put a few things in there. Everything else was, done at room temp. And what we had left over from lunch, the big meal was lunch. They would put a white tablecloth over the leftovers, and that would be what we had for supper. And they made a big breakfast in the kitchen. And he had, Carver would help her with questions about vegetables in the garden and anything that was didn't grow well, or sometimes he brought her seeds of different kinds of, I guess we would say varieties, to try. And sometimes It was always something that she thought the boarders would like. It wasn't rare stuff that, you know, that people might not know anything about, wouldn't eat. But anyway, the people from the I could only go down so far. I don't know when y'all came, if you came in how you came to the campus, but there's the town was around a square, and then Tuskegee land property for the school was probably about a quarter to half a mile from. A lot of places in the books say a mile, but it wasn't. It was an old plantation on the edge of town, but now it's not. It's all big and grown together. But I could only go to the edge of where the road to the school started, and I wasn't allowed to come down to the school. My grandmother and her friends they would call it the Institute, and that's what they called it. And on Saturday was the only time they could come to town. And town has a square downtown, and the businesses are around the square. And so Carver and the students would come down from the road from the school from here down towards town, and would come turn to go toward the square where the businesses were. And he would come by Grandmama's house, and she would know, you know, they would know if he was coming. So she would be out in the yard, in the garden, the flower bed. He would stop and talk. If you talked to him, he wouldn't go up into a yard or come up on the porch without somebody knowing about it or being invited. But they got to be he was very friendly. Many white people were very comfortable with him, and he would talk and share information, and he would share recipes during his time. So I don't know how. It was not a friendship like we think of friendships like y'all have with each other, or we would have. It was everybody. When I would ask, they'd say they knew. They know their place, and that's a phrase that you see sometimes in books. If you talk to people from the older people, we call them colored people back then. We did not say African American. That term was not used, and blacks was really not used. So when I talk to my students, sometimes I use the terms that I grew up with without thinking that other people may. That's not a negative term or anything. It's just what it was. So grandmother knew him in those terms. Okay.
So sorry.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. I just wanted to get more information. Why weren't you allowed to come down to the
Black
institute?
people and white people did not go visiting together. In general. Now, when I grew up, I saw things and I heard things. Sometimes they did not make sense. Well, I had been told I was a very rebellious child, and I was very stubborn. So it's possible that I, got myself in more trouble by asking questions that other people did not have to deal with. However, grandmother had, there was 7, 8, maybe 10 different women, black women, that would come to the house and help her in the boarding house. They would come at 5 o'clock and they would be there. And I was born in that house, so when my sister was born, I was a year and a half, and then I had another sister that was born a year and a half after that. And after my first sister was born, we moved across the street into a little house over there, but we came back and ate with grandmother. So, and I was over there all the time. I much prefer to be at her house than at my house. So, so I stayed where they were in the kitchen. Some of them, the biggest majority, they'd come. Some would go in the garden and start picking, and some would go in the kitchen and start cooking breakfast. And there was a big screen porch on the back, and they had rocking chairs back there. And probably one of the first washing machines, the old-timey washing machines in the city. And I liked to be around them because they knew each other, and they would talk and they would laugh, and they after they'd come in from the garden, they would sit in the rocking chairs. Some would pick peas, some would snap beans, some would shuck corn, some were churning butter, some were making ice cream for dessert. There was all kind of stuff going on, and they would sing spirituals. So I got to hear all the spiritual songs in my life. And I grew up with that music, which I loved. And so I would love to stay out there, but I know I was busy and I know I bothered them. But if I harassed them enough, they would let me shell the peas. Sometimes they knew I probably would last 10 minutes and I'd be gone. And that happened, but I would stay out there anyway. I got to know a lot of them. And grandmother was working with them. I saw her working just so the color of the skin made no difference. They were doing the same thing. One time I was told, when we had birthday parties, they put the birthday announcement in the newspaper in the society section, and everybody came. I mean, you didn't have little invitations to your classmates, or anybody could come. So my birthday was in January, and if the weather was nice, we had the party outside in the front yard. Well, the ladies that worked with grandmother in the kitchen would bring their children sometime to work, and we had to play in the backyard. We could not come they couldn't come in the front yard. But I didn't realize that. We had to play in the backyard. And she had a great big backyard, and from the back of the house was a huge empty space, and we had one side was clear because they hung the wet clothes on one side. The other side, there was a big, huge pecan tree, and there was black wash pots where they built the fires under there and kept boiling water sometimes. They would wash clothes there. They would kill chickens and bring the neck and dip them in the hot water and get the feathers off, which I thought was fascinating, but I did not want to do that. And then there was a barn, and the chickens were in the yard, but they slept in the barn. And then all behind across the back was the garden at the back, and then behind that was a fenced-in pasture where they grew hogs, because that's what we had. In the fall, they'd slaughter the hogs, and they had a smokehouse, and they would make hams and bacon and other things. So we had chicken and ham. I don't ever remember having beef, but that's not important. The important thing was anything that was not used during the day from the garden, certain days a week was set aside, or every week or two, to can, because that's what grandmother canned stuff. Carver was big on including women in the farmers' meetings, not just to teach the farmers what to grow outside, but how to include the women so they would would understand how to fix varieties of different recipes of the same thing, so that it would give variety to the meal as well as more nutritious things. So he would include the women to come to, and he would do demonstrations and show them how to cook at the farmers' conferences that they had here through agriculture extension. Anyway, so the women would come to work with grandmother. Some cleaned up the house for the boarders, but the ones that were in the kitchen were always in the kitchen because they were very well-known cooks, evidently. So when I grew up later and started school, when we moved to Auburn, I would tell my students I never went to a class with anybody but white students. All the way through my master's and in my doctorate, it was the first time I had a black student in my class, and I was older. I was 53 when I got my doctorate, and my first black student was Bo Jackson. He had finished, and he was coming back to finish his last course for his degree. He was already playing professional football, so, but. Anyway, so after we got to Auburn and I got growing up, and I saw that we had black schools and white schools, and we didn't meet, and we didn't visit together. We had a maid all the time. We called them maids, and they were black. So I saw them help. I would see them in our house, and we would talk and visit. When I was like in the 4th grade, I think we had a maid whom we loved. My sisters and I loved her. She was a rather large person, and she was very cheerful, and she was very happy all the time. And her name was Lula. Well, we call her Lulu, and she liked that. And she wore a colored head rag, a do-rag, and she would bring some records sometimes over and play them while she was cleaning up on my little record player. And she had one that I remember that I loved the music for. The name of it was Caledonia, What Makes Your Big Head So Hard. And she'd play that thing over and over. Well, she would make comments about that at her house, they danced and sang and played those records on the weekend at her house. Well, I wanted to go to her house. That was not something that I should have asked. But anyway, I bugged my parents evidently enough that they let my sister and myself go across the railroad track on just a short distance away from my house one day, and we got there. We were so excited. We got there, and then everybody on the block knew we were coming. They had fixed food and stuff for us, and we played the records, and we sang, and we danced. We had the best time. I wanted to go back. I could have moved over there, but of course I was not allowed to do that. So I had to be given a lecture on what I could do and what I couldn't do, and it made no sense whatsoever to me. And when I got deterred a minute ago, when I was maybe 4 or 5, I wanted to have a birthday party, and I assumed that the kids and the children of the ladies that were helping Grandma cook would come to my birthday party. Well, I was told that they would not be coming. So I didn't understand that, so I was told I pitched a big fit, and I said I would not have a birthday party. Well, it was not heard of that I would not have a birthday party. So I had 2 birthday parties. I had one in the backyard and one in the front yard. And I'm sure that, I was so excited. I don't think I got presents, but I was so excited about having the parties because I liked the cake and ice cream and all that and playing that I remembered that, but after a while I forgot about it. And I didn't think about it till one day I was here doing something and I've forgotten what triggered that memory. And anyway, during the time after I grew up and realized about segregation and what it meant and started trying to learn a little bit about it, it was very hard to get anybody to talk to you about anything. And the women that stayed at our house that took care of us while Mother and Daddy worked, some of them you could not talk to very well. Lulu would have told me anything if I had known what to ask at the time. But anyway, so when I got a chance to come back to Tuskegee to teach, I was grateful because I thought, well, now I'll go find out for myself. I think total immersion is the best way to find out anything. Reading in a book is one thing. Talking to some people and asking the right questions may get you some good answers, it may not. So anyway, so I came, and it did not ever occur to me that I would not be welcome, and I was welcomed everywhere. So that was probably one of the best decisions I ever made in my life was to come here.
And that's incredible. You mentioned a lot about how your grandmother worked with these women. Did she ever get in trouble for that?
No, that's something else. It's sort of a dichotomy, I think, when I think back. The women the women of the house, the owners of the house, like my grandmother, people, you knew you had to have help, and so you had help. But the help knew that you did not go to their house. We did not go to their house or their church or anything after the work hours were over. And they knew a lot they knew how things were and how they'd been raised. And so I was raised in the same way, although I don't think I think probably I asked more questions and got in more trouble for asking questions and not understanding things than other people. But I didn't have anybody to talk to. I mean, nobody. If you tried, you didn't get any answers. It was, they would say that's the way things are, or you know, when you get older, you'll understand. Well, when I got older, I did not understand at all. So when I was in Montgomery, after '58, when my parents moved down there, and when I graduated from, I left Auburn and went to transferred to Montgomery to school and finished down there. We still had a maid, and they still came and cleaned the house, but there was no visitation. And then at some point, probably in the '60s, early '60s to late '50s, I can't remember. There was talk of, I don't know if they said it was integration. I wasn't really paying that much attention, but when I came home to grandmother's house, I would hear them talking, and they were very upset. The neighbors would be very upset, and we weren't allowed to come and listen. But sometimes I eavesdropped if I could. And I knew that they would that the conversation would be about who was leaving town and moving. And at that later, I realized that it was older people knowing that integration was coming, and they were getting their children and their grandchildren out of the Tuskegee to move, and they'd moved to Auburn and Montgomery. And they started sometimes there was a period of time when private schools were begun and big, and that was a way to keep things status quo and be ready. But anyway, many of the white people that I had that were parents, like my mother and dad at the same age, would not hear after I got grown and in college. And there would be times after my granddaddy died and grandmother moved to Auburn near us, that I didn't come to Tuskegee as much. So when I did come back to see my aunts, my friends and their mothers and daddies were no longer here, and it took me a long time to figure out why. But then things moved rapidly from then on. But when we got to Montgomery, and after I got out of college and worked, we went to a church that was a brand new church, and the community, Montgomery was spreading out to one section of new area. And so the older Presbyterian church where I went was charged with starting a new church in that area. So part of the older population of that church went to the new church to start it, and then the community that was growing there, young couples were moving in there, they would come to the church. And during the it had to have been the 50s. I mean, 58 I moved down there, so it was the early 60s. I don't know, I haven't thought about it enough to figure it out. The bus boycott happened in Montgomery. It was very large. And we had a maid, and many of the maids were involved in the boycott, from either whether they participated or whether they just stayed home because they were told to stay home to help support the boycott. I remember my parents talking about it, and I wasn't involved. I mean, I didn't really realize, it didn't affect me very much. But then after that, there was a time when the talk of the Selma to Montgomery March was being planned, and the Freedom Riders. I guess the Freedom Riders came first. There's all these fragments of things that was going on and that I didn't put the picture together because we just didn't talk about it. But I knew that it was happening, and the parents were all very upset about it, and they didn't want to talk to us about it. But the hospital where I worked, St. Margaret's Hospital, was right next within a block of the early part of Alabama State. it's much bigger now, and it's spread huge. But back then, the core of it was within the block of the hospital. And I remember when the SNCC people, participants in the SNCC group would come, they would stay on Alabama State campus. And I had to go through that area to get to the hospital. And I remember my parents were very concerned with my safety, and I did not understand that. I didn't realize, wasn't paying attention to the newspaper and stuff like that. I was young and you know, making money for the first time. And I was getting married, and 2 years later I had a daughter. So I was very busy doing my thing, learning how to be what I was supposed to be at that time. But anyway, the plans for the Selma March were getting pretty big. In the blood bank, all the blood banks in town the blood bankers knew each other. The hospital blood bankers knew each other because we had an association, and we met and we talked about what new things were happening. So the blood bank at St. Jude's Hospital, blood bankers there would talk. We would talk, and they were getting ready to be a part of the one of the camping sites for the marchers. So they had to have a lot of. They were preparing a lot of extra blood supply in their hospital in case something happened. Well, at our hospital, they put extra guards on for the parking lot for us, because some of us worked second shift and got off at night. And it was very interesting because it was a Catholic hospital, and the lab was right off of the elevator lobby on the second floor, and there was a hallway, and our lab sections of the lab were up and down that hallway, and at the end of the hallway was a great big large apartment, and the priest lived there, and he had like bedrooms and a kitchen and living room. You know, it was almost a small house, and he had people that stayed in there with him and took care of his appointments and visitors and all that. Well, when they were planning the march, we didn't realize what was going on for a few days, but people, very important looking people, would come with the guards, the security guards from downstairs would escort them past the lab, and our doors were open, and sometimes they'd look in, and they'd go past and go to the father's quarters back there, and he would greet them, you know, and they would stay. Well, one set of a night or two before the actual march finally was taking place, that people that had gotten to St. Jude's, they were putting cots up outside in the hallway. I thought, what is this? It was there was sections of the lab. The last section was chemistry, and it was between the door from the main door into Father's quarters. He had a little hallway that came off so that they could go into different rooms down there, into the kitchen, and come in or out without bothering everybody else. That's where they were putting the cots up. Well, pretty soon that evening, the 2 evenings that I remember, people were being shown extra. They didn't go in this place. They would go in, they'd come back out, but they would put their stuff by their little cots. So we got the idea they were going to be spending the night out there. So we found out later those were some of the leaders of the march group. They wouldn't let the newscast people wanted to come to the hospital, but they wouldn't let them do that. They would come to the outside, so we knew that. But anyway, I don't remember watching the television that much. I didn't have that much time, but here late, you know, in the latter years, I've seen when they crossed the bridge and they were attacked by the sheriff's people, whoever all the people were that were there to do the attack, and that was horrible to me. I could not understand that. So the day before the march was coming into Montgomery, the final step. St. Margaret's was also a block on the other side from the Capitol, a block and a half from the Capitol, and the main road was going to come down on one end of the hospital away from us. We had a road that came on this side. There was a road on both sides of the hospital, and the ambulance entrance was on the side nearest our lab, on the first floor. Well, the march was supposed to come down on the other end, on the other street, straight down into the Capitol. And I did not find out till here, when I was working here many years later, an important piece of that march that I did not know about. But my point is that the day that it was supposed to happen, they came down the road they were supposed to, and then all of a sudden, I did not know it was all of a sudden, they turned and came one block another direction, and then they turned and came another street, came right by the hospital emergency room, and so we went because we knew somebody said they're coming, and we didn't know that wasn't the route they were supposed to come, and the Martin Luther King and the group were marching, side by side, and they had a wreath. They came by and we watched the whole thing. Well, I thought that was very exciting. I mean, I knew what the march was about and all that, and I was not negatively worried about. I mean, I was not. If I had been able to say I was a supporter, that's probably what I would have been. Anyway, nobody asked me that. And I surely couldn't talk about that at my house because my parents were not of that idea. Well, mother never did say too much about it, but previous to that, a few weeks before that, or maybe months, as the thing was building up, the churches, there was a Sunday that the Martin Luther King's group from his church, they decided that they would go and integrate the churches in Montgomery. So during that week or two that those plans were being made, all the white churches had to make a decision of were they going to open their door or not. Well, at our church, we had been members a few years, and people had gotten close friendships, and it caused a huge rift. They split. And the older group that had come from the original church, many of them were older people, and they were doctors, lawyers. And many of them didn't. Everybody split. Some were friends with this group, some were friends with that group, and had been since childhood. But it caused a lot of problems within the friendship group. So the older ones, one group went back to the old church, and we stayed at the new church. Well, my daddy was a deacon and an elder at the different times, and some of those people never got over that, the friendships breaking up. But anyway, one of those men in the church that stayed was a friend of ours. Well, was a friend of my daddy's. He was my daddy's age. And one day I was coming in the front up here, and his wife, whom I remember, I hadn't seen him in a long time since I had moved back up here, was in his office, in Dana's office. And they saw me and greeted me and told me to come in and, catch up on what I'd been doing. And so she was writing a book, and Dana was helping her. So her husband had driven her up here. And so he said, let's go over here and talk, we'll catch up. Well, he told me that he had been the planning person for the march route on the day of the march. And that was years before now. I mean, we're in the 90s or 2000s, and we're talking about in the 70s. So he told me that because of the certainty that they had heard rumors, but they had it confirmed that the sheriff's department and the police were not going to do anything for the safety of the marchers, and that if anything could be done to cause a riot, it was going to happen, and they were not going to try to stop it.
And just to clarify, is this the important piece of information you said that you found out about the march later on in life? Because earlier you mentioned that later on, looking back into the march, you found an important piece of information. Could you talk about?
This is it.
That was it? Okay.
Anyway, so he said that he was in charge of the route, and he said that, well, let me divert back. During the week before that, my husband, who was a very tall person, extremely tall. He played basketball for Auburn. He was also a cattle person. He rode horses and he had guns, and he had been called, there was a group of them in Montgomery that had agriculture background. They had farming background, and when the floods came and the waters in North Montgomery got too high, and the cattle there was a big cattle auction area there, and there was a lot of farmers on the other side of the river that had cattle. They would all get called together to go down and try to get pickup trucks and go help them move the cattle to higher ground. So they all knew each other. He came in one night and told me he was real excited. He had been called by the sheriff to come down to a meeting. So this is like on a Wednesday night, I think, and he was usually not in town on Wednesday during the week. And he was very excited. So he went to the meeting. When he came back, I asked him what they talked about, and he said he showed me a deputy's badge thing and a billy stick, billy club, whatever you call those things. And I said, well, what's that for? He said, well, we got deputized and we're going to be monitoring the march. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, we're going to monitor the march, and I'm going to be on the horse group. That's not what he called it, but anyway, there was a group that were going to be riding horses. And he said, I said, what is it about then? Why did you have to have a meeting? And he said, we were told, he told me, that they were told where they were supposed to be and meet and what time and all that, the logistics. But he said, he was kind of excited, and he said if anybody stepped up on a curb away from the route, he said, we were going to beat the heck out of them. And that upset me. Sorry. You can cut this out. And I said, what are you talking about? He said, we're not going to stop anything. If they start fighting, we're going to fight. He said, we'll just ride the horses right down through there, and we're just going to knock the shit out of them. And that really bothered me. I don't talk about this often. Anyway, so back up here, the guy that I was talking to said I was in charge of the route. Excuse me, I'm so sorry. No, he said I was in charge of the route, and he said, I don't have any tears.
It's okay, just in case.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't think I'll have any tears. He said I was in charge of the route, and he said that when I heard, he evidently heard this same story, and he confirmed it. And he said, so I decided, and I talked to Martin Luther King, and he said 2 or 3 others, only us were the only ones that knew it. He said, we changed the route. He said, I made the decision to change the route, and I didn't tell anybody. I didn't tell the police or nobody. He said, and I moved them 1 block away. So when they turned and came behind the hospital and back down the side of the hospital and back down the back of the Capitol, that was his decision, and nothing happened. Nobody got upset. Nobody got hit. Nobody got hurt. We had been told in the blood bank that we had to have lots of extra units of blood from our normal inventory. We had stocked up, and everybody, the emergency room had extra supplies because we were the hospital on the route, and the hospital was prepared for really thinking that the worst was going to happen. and it didn't. And I sat there and I said, his name was Willie Peak, Mr. Willie Peak, and I said, "You did that?" And he said, "Yeah." And he said, I said, "Well, how did I know that?" He said, "Nobody knew that." So I said, "Well, I'm so grateful you told me that, because I had no clue that I knew that the worst had been thought, and I knew it had been planned for, and some people were very excited, hoping it would happen." And I said, and we were all very relieved that we didn't. There were a few, people normally pushing and shoving and that sort of thing, but not the thing they were expecting. It wasn't that they caused it on purpose. It wasn't the marchers that caused it. It was just general people. Anyway, that was my revelation.
Thank you so much for sharing that piece of thank you so much for sharing that piece of information with us.
You're welcome.
And it has been an insightful time with you. As we're wrapping up, I just wanted to ask, is there anything else that you would like to mention before we conclude this interview? Anything else? Any comments?
No, not necessarily, except maybe one thing when it's not important. I mean, it's not pertaining to the archives or anything, but when my first daughter was born, my mother and my grandmother insisted that I have somebody come in to make, because I was working then, and so they interviewed several people, black ladies, to come and take care of her. And my husband would not approve anybody. And one day somebody knocked on the back door, opened the back door, and there was this little old black lady there. I mean, she was old. Back then, when you're 20-something, you think people that are 50 are old. She was 60 and gray-headed. And he talked to her. He went to the door and talked to her, and he opened the back door and told her to come in. And so her name was Elvira. She stayed with us until my children were grown, and they adored her. She'd come when I'd have to be out of town. She'd come and spend the night, she'd stay the weekend and help. And I was so grateful for her, because I'd have never been able to work and do what I did, going to school and working, and because I had a beeper when I became head of the blood bank all the time, and I'd get called back in the middle of the night, and my husband would be out of town. So it was a very natural thing for me to do. And she wanted to work. She was retired several times, and she wanted to work where there would be children, babies. And so she was delighted. My children, when my second one was born and my third one, there was 9 years between the first one and the second one. So the two youngest were like 3 years apart. And when they got to be 6, 7, 8, and Elvira was going to retire, and she did, and she picked the person that would come and take care of them after that. They would pool their little money they got every week, and I'd come home sometime, and Elvira would be at the house spending the night making fried chicken, because Will, my son, wanted her fried chicken, and they would pool their little money they had and call the cab, one of her brother-in-laws. He would bring her over there from her house. They called on the phone and asked if she'd come, and he would bring her, and they'd pay their money, and Elvira would come and spend the night, and then I would take her home the next day. So that went on for a long time, So they really, I was determined that my children were not going to grow up not being told, "Oh, we can't talk about that," but you'll know when you get older that things were not. I didn't want them to see colors of skin as a problem for whether you associate with somebody or not. And they're doing well.
I'm glad to hear. Once again, thank you so much for your time, and this concludes our interview.
Play the middle or the top.
nice.